Behold, the torture corridor.
Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't.
Hello, my name is Edudel and I'm working on the remake of my first game, Prisoner. Prisoner is a simple action RPG I made back in 2015, and I'm using this opportunity to learn how to 3D model. If you are interested in the process that got me here, there are other videos talking about the project. Since last episode I added a simple interface to show the player's health, moving traps that hurt and push back the characters of the game, a falling mechanic that affects the player and the enemies, and made some improvements and fixed a few bugs. Let's review the process. I started by creating an interface for the game. Whenever I have to create an interface, I use Game UI Database. It's a great site to get information from other games and see what works best for your project. I have put the link in the description if you want to check it out. For the interface of Prisoner's Remake, I'm looking for something simple and readable. It won't contain too much information, just the health and a key count for later in the game, and I'm thinking about adding a stamina bar and experience points, but I will talk about that in a later episode. In the original game, you also had a score count, but I won't use that in the remake. The score was used to gain more lives in game, something more fitting for an arcade game rather than an action RPG. Speaking of which, that's one of the changes I want to implement compared to the original Prisoner. The idea is to be able to increment health, attack and dodge mechanics by gaining experience points, so that the game is really an action RPG. For that, I implemented a dynamic interface that will reflect how many health the player has, and when the player gets hurt, one health image is depleted. The same happens when healing oneself, the interface will reflect that. Also, if the health gets really low, a heartbeat animation is played. I was thinking about adding a sound effect to let the player know that the health is low, but I have always found that kind of alert annoying. What do you think? What would you add to be more obvious about the low health? Next, I started modeling traps for the game. In the original Prisoner, there were spike traps that push only the player. As you saw at the start of the video, I changed that in the remake. This mechanic will help the level design feel more varied, and even give the player more tools to dispatch enemies. The blade of the trap will use the same material as the enemy's armor. It will rotate around a wooden base. The first attempt was really ugly. The blade looked okay, but the base was definitely a goner. So I opted for a simpler design, like a wooden stump. I think that's a bit better, don't you? The next step was to use the same damage component from the character weapons to the trap. It was really easy to adapt to the blade, and it will push the player back when colliding with him. Following that, I added a sound effect to the trap, but I had some problems with the 3D sound. I wanted the trap to only be heard when the player is near, so I had to rethink the audio manager I made a little bit. What I did is changing the max distance at which the sound effects are heard. This way you won't be annoyed by out-of-screen traps. And I also added another sound effect for when the trap hits a character. Later I started to think about how to make a fall mechanic. In the original Prisoner you could fall down in certain areas and lose health. Falling down will also teleport you back to a checkpoint. So I made a dark corridor where the traps will be moving, but I wasn't sure how to move the camera when the player is falling. Being 3D, the remake will present more of a challenge than the original game. As I said in a previous episode, I'm using Unity's Cinemachine to handle the camera of the game. And after a few tests, I was happy with disabling the following of the player when falling down. The camera will still look at the player, but it will stay in place. For now, I was doing it manually. I still needed to code that effect. However, for a change of scenery, I jumped back into Blender to create a falling animation. Something simple, as the character will fade out into the blackness when falling down. Back in Unity, when the character falls into a pit, the animation is played, and after a few seconds, the camera follows the player again. For now, the poor thing will stay on the bottom of the pit, trapped forever. But not for long, I needed to create a checkpoint manager, and I thought that the trap will look silly just moving in the air, so I created some metal railings for them. For better visualization, I added a gizmo to the checkpoints collider, so I can see where they are in all times. This gizmo will not show up in the game, but it's great to have in Unity's editor. Whenever the player touches one of these colliders, the checkpoint will be set as the active one, and if he happens to fall down, he will be teleported back to its position. But most times I will probably want a different position for the checkpoint at the spawn position. So this is customizable, and can be seen in the editor as this green diamond icon. Let's try this checkpoint system. There was a little problem with the rotation of the player when respawning. This is because Unity's default setting is to show the global orientation of objects. As this spawn point is a child object, I need to switch to local orientation to visualize things better. Now I only have to rotate the point and the player will face that blue arrow, the forward axis. Still, one detail was missing. When you fall into the blackness, the camera is still rendering the game. This is okay in some cases, but sometimes the player will be able to see the character fall until the respawn is made. To fix that, I created a fade in and out system on the interface. With just a line of code, I can schedule a fade out for the duration I want. And to test things out, I created a debug script. Now when the player falls down, the screen fades to black and 1 point of health is decreased. However, it still was feeling a bit bland, so I decided to implement more sound effects for the player. First, when he gets hit, it feels like he's okay and not in pain. A few grunts and screams will fix that. And a higher scream when he falls down will come in handy. But falling down in purpose stopped being funny like 5 minutes ago. Hence, the moving traps. I installed some railings and traps in the corridor, and made a small script to let it move along the path. I can control the speed of the trap by determining how many seconds it will take to reach the next point. This will help to balance difficulty of these parts, as the original Prisoner had really unfair corridors with traps.
Behold, the torture corridor.
Our poor character will have to traverse this corridor if he wants to escape the prison. Well, I won't actually use this scene for the final game, but something similar will appear. Actually, it was kinda dark, and I don't want to add difficulty based on you can see things hitting you. Back to Blender and to make a standing torch. And back to Unity and illuminate that corridor a bit. But something was wrong. A point light wasn't enough to light the floor of the corridor. I tried adding a second point light to the object. What at this in front of the torch and lights the floor. Still, I wasn't convinced by the effect. It seemed a bit dark, but I'm constantly working on the lighting of the scene and changing things. In the end, I opted to use a spotlight to create a spherical light on the ground. To change the scenery once more, I did something that was long overdue. Remember in last episode, I created a system to break down things. In the original Prisoner, you could break crates to gain health or score points. In the remake, you will find only health on these objects, but I did two types of destructible objects, crates and barrels. As a test, I only did the crates of the scenery, so you can destroy them. The barrels were next. Now the player can break those down and find health inside of them, and the system works exactly as with the crates, with gravity and all. Also, the enemies can break those down too. By the way, someone pointed out on Reddit that the health interface was too big, so I reduced it to be half of the original size. What do you think? Another of the fixes I made for this episode has to be with the enemies. In the second episode of this devlog, I explained that the enemies are surprised when seeing the player. The problem is that the animation is a bit long, and the player can rush the enemy and kill him without being hurt. That might be okay for an initial level or a tutorial, but I would love more response from the enemies. Therefore, I added a new variable, to determine the distance at which the enemy will stop the animation and start attacking or chasing the player. And the great thing about this is that it's customizable for each enemy, so I can create smarter enemies for later parts of the game. Also, if you maintain your distance, the enemy will do the animation as he normally did. Nevertheless, if I wanted to be able to drop down enemies by colliding with the traps, I needed some things. To get started, a proper knockback mechanic for the enemy. That mechanic is present on the player, but not on the enemies. And for some reason it gave me some trouble, and led to some strange and hilarious moments. However, after a few hours I managed to fix it, and incidentally add more sound effects to the enemies, grunts and screams, as I did for the player. And honestly, I got a little carried away and started messing with the new falling mechanic. Let this clip be a reminder not to be too cocky when you finally get to play the game. And that's my progress so far. What do you think? Do you like the fall mechanic? What about the sound effects? I think they give more personality to the game. As always, if you have any suggestions or ideas for the game, I would love to read them in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications, so you won't miss any new updates. I also post often in the social sites, so follow me if you want. Thank you so much for the support and watching these videos. I think I'm getting closer to have a demo and get some real feedback from you. That would be awesome. I can honestly wait. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.